The Holy Bible, the King James Version. The Book of Psalms, Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Oh, it is working. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining Toronto Bible Study. Today we're talking about Daniel 11, which is one of the most complex and detailed prophetic chapters in the Bible, if not the most. It's probably the most, okay? So this is going to be a very detailed historical analysis and also prophetic analysis, okay? So I hope you'll be able to enjoy this and learn from it. Well, let me just get my things together here, and then we'll start. Well, first, let's say a prayer before we do anything else, okay? Heavenly Father, Almighty God, Father, how great is thy name in all the earth. How excellent is thy name in all the earth. All the earth is thine, Father, and the heavens are thine. The work of thy fingers, they declare thy glory. Father, we're about to look at Daniel 11 today, and we just ask for your wisdom and guidance to understand these things and to learn your path, learn the wisdom that you're seeking to teach us from these scriptures, and also to just glorify your name, Father, and glorify the name of your holy Son, Jesus Christ. Bless the listeners, Father. Give them wisdom, give them strength. Help them to grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. On him be glory forever and ever. Amen. All right. So, hey, Russ, how are you, brother? God bless, man. Sorry about the late posting of the live. I wanted to post it before, but something happened. I guess I thought I had posted it. It didn't go up, though, for some reason. I think something happened there. Anyway, thanks for coming, brother. All right, so let's get into this presentation. So Daniel 11, the kings of the north and south. This is a section from 5 to 20 that kind of dominates the chapter, where they discuss these kings north and south of the people of Israel. They're constantly fighting, and Israel becomes this corridor where their fighting is always taking place. But we get from Persia to Greece to Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes is the one who slaughtered the swine on the altar in Jerusalem, and he's sort of thought of as like the one that Daniel talks of as the abomination of desolation. But he's a type that also will lead into future elements similar to him, like the Antichrist. Let's talk about it as we get into it. So Daniel 11, the wars of the kings. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Where's my sorry guys, give me 1 sec. Okay, so where are we in division? Now, Daniel 10, we saw that there was this war of angels, which is kind of behind the empires, right? So the empires fight on earth, but in the background, the angels are fighting, and the fallen angels are fighting them as well. And so that was the background of the story of history. But this is now focusing on the history that we see in the real world, or in the physical world. Okay. So Daniel's gonna step into the stage of history, and this is as I was saying, it's the most detailed prophetic chapter in the whole Old Testament. in verse 11, in chapter 11, verse 2, it says, the angel said to Daniel, "Now will I show thee the truth." And it's amazing because he truly does show Daniel another way of seeing things. And now will I show thee the truth. Okay, and we'll see that as we go through the chapter. We'll see that the angel is showing him a detailed look at history as it unfolds after the Empire of Babylon, then the Greeks, and even into the Roman Empire. Okay, so it's not about the symbolic beast that we saw before, right? For example, in Daniel 7. Here we're seeing kings named, the movements of these troops and the alliances and the betrayals. So it's very detailed. It's getting down to the nitty-gritty of these people's lives, these kings and these queens and stuff. So it's deliberate because it wants us to see that God controls all these things. God is in charge of how all these things rise and fall. Okay? Now there's a continuity from chapter 10 where chapter 10, it was revealed that, there was a prayer heard. Daniel's prayer was heard. And then the delay was explained. The delay between Daniel's prayer and when the angel actually came to see him was 3 weeks. And in that time, the angel was being resisted by the prince of Persia, who was a fallen angel who was resisting him. But then Michael came and helped him. And then the angel was able to go and talk to Daniel and tell him the prophecy. So that spiritual conflict is continuing on. And this is just continuing on from chapter 10. There's no break here. It's chapter 10, 11, and 12 is one vision. Okay? So chapter 11 is going to show us how that conflict of the angels manifests in history. And it's going to show us how thy people that we saw in chapter 10, thy people being Daniel's people, how they're caught between these empires all the time. And they're always being, that's like their fate, to be caught between the empires that are struggling against each other. All right. And that because of that struggle, the covenants, their covenant people, the covenant people suffer, but it unfolds in stages that Daniel 11 shows to us. All right. It's not a random war chronicle. It's the covenant history being played out in world history. So the chapter begins with here you have the Persian kings, Darius the Mede, the first year of Darius the Mede, Daniel, and then also here we talk a little bit more about the three kings in Persia. And then sort of all against the realm of Grecia. That's Greece. Okay. And then in 3 and 4, you see the rise of Greece. Okay. And then from 5, and then after the rise of Greece is Alexander the Great. Okay, he takes over most of the known world. But then his empire, after he dies at a young age of 32, his empire is divided between his 4 generals. And that's what we see. Their struggles is what we see from from verse 5 to verse 20. Okay? The successors of Alexander are struggling against each other. And then from chapter 20, from verse 21 to verse 35, that's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. And he's the one that I was telling you, he's the one who ruled the Seleucid Empire, which is the largest of the 4 regions of Alexander's empire. And he's the one who conquers Jerusalem and eventually slaughters a pig on the altar. It's like this desecration of the altar. Okay? And then from chapter 36 to 45, you have this tyranny which is exalting itself up to the height of God. It's exalting itself as if it was God. And there's no textual break there. People often say that that's in the future, that's the Antichrist. And there's some truth to that in the sense that there's this typological thing going, right? But there's no actual leap there, no break in the text to signal that there's a leap of thousands of years into the future. The flow is just continuous from Antiochus in 21 to 35, then into this tyranny of the self-exalting ruler. Okay? So the pattern of self-exaltation and pride, the pride of human rulership, is intensified in that section. But it's nothing to say that it's going into the future thousands of years, okay? The core question then for us is, excuse me, what happens when empire turns from conquering territory to conquering worship, to going into the temple and forcing people to worship their gods? Daniel 11 answers that. Human power always escalates from just political expansion of rulership and kingdoms and strategic alliances, betrayals, and finally to profaning the temple, and finally to the ruler exalting himself as God and self-deifying himself. Okay? So that escalation from politics up to religion is the pattern that we see again and again throughout history, and we'll continue to see it even to this day. So by the end of this chapter, you'll see my promise to you is that Daniel 11 maps history with astonishing precision. Antiochus IV shows this kind of inner logic of the power of the beast. The inner mentality of the beast is embodied in Antiochus IV, okay? And that you'll see that these self-exalting rulers repeat the same pattern across history, and that the covenant's suffering is never outside of God's rule. God always takes care of the covenant people. Even though they suffer, he'll still be with them. He'll still protect them and guide them until they reach the destination that he chooses, okay? So you'll see all that today. You'll see that the final hope is not in this geopolitics and the outcome of empires, right? But in the breaking of the arrogant power of empire by God without hand, as you may recall from Daniel 2. He breaks the empire without hand. The stone cut without hand is Jesus, all right? So we'll go through the chapter piece by piece. The first section is from 1 to 4. That's Persia and Greece. Then we'll see the other section from 5 to 20. That's the kings of the north and south. That's when the Greek empires are the four empires of Daniel's divided kingdom are struggling against one another. And then you'll see from 21 to 35, the contemptible king, Antiochus. And then from verse 36 to 45, we'll see the self-magnifying king. Historically, it's Antiochus, but typologically, it's found throughout history, okay? Let's go through this this section one by one. Let me just show you some slides, though. Oh, this is my slide of the promise, okay? So history unfolds under God's precision, his precise understanding of history, okay? And it escalates toward worship and control. The empires, they go from political control to worship control to religious control. And Antiochus is the clearest example of that pattern of prideful power. Okay. And then also we'll see that all these self-exalting rulers come to their end. Now, this is the Persian Empire here, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, this pink region here. And so this is the rulership. This is the empire that Daniel's living under when we see him at the beginning of the chapter. Well, let's go through the different sections here. So after Cyrus, there was Cambyses II, then Pseudo-Smerces or Galmata, then Darius I, that's the one that Daniel's under now, and then Xerxes. He stirs up Greece. He's the one who sent Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay. This is their empire as well. Okay, let's go back to the Bible here. Also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far. By the way, this is when he says this. Also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. This is the angel speaking. Okay, from Daniel 10. Remember the angel finished off speaking to Daniel. When he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and I said, let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. So Daniel's saying that to the angel. Now the angel says, then said he, knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia, the angel, the prince of Persia, the fallen angel, okay? And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. The prince of Grecia is another fallen angel behind Alexander's empire. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael, your prince. So Michael, the archangel, is helping this angel that's speaking to Daniel against these other angels. Okay? And then as he goes on now in Daniel 11, now he's continuing to speak. Okay? Also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. Darius the Mede is the king who Daniel is under. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he rules. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. So this is Alexander. A mighty king shall stand up, shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That's Alexander. When he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. That's because Alexander dies, and his kingdom is divided into 4 regions. Okay, not to his posterity. That is not to his children, not to his heirs, but to these other generals, these other men. Okay. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's just now will I show you the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through his riches shall he stir up all against the realm of Grecia. Okay, and that was what I was showing you here. So after Darius the First, then there was Cambyses the Second. Oh, sorry. After Cyrus, there was Cambyses the Second, then Pseudo-Smerces, then Darius the First, then Xerxes. This is a different Darius than Darius the Mede. This Darius the Mede, this is the one that Daniel is under in Babylon. He's like a servant of Cyrus the king. All right. Cyrus is the actual king of Persia. After Cyrus, there was Cambyses, then Pseudo-Smerces, Then Darius the First, that's the actual king of Persia. That's different than Darius the Mede, who we see in the story of Daniel. Okay, and then you have Xerxes, and like I say, he's the one who was the Bible calls him Ahasuerus, which is Xerxes in their language. Okay. Well, it's Xerxes in Greek, but anyway. Let's go back to the Bible. So this Darius is a different Darius than the one I showed you in the list there. But that's why the three kings in Persia and the fourth will be far richer than they all. That's Xerxes. Xerxes the Great. And by his strength through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So he's the one that stirred up against Grecia, okay? And then so Xerxes is the wealthy one who's an aggressor. And so he began a campaign against the Greeks in 480 BC. And then that's when Alexander began to rise up. And a mighty king shall stand up, shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. That's Alexander the Great. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, because Alexander dies at 32 and his empire is divided. Right? Not to his offspring, not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, but among four generals. Ptolemy, what's the guy's name? Lysander and these other guys. This guy Seleucid. Okay, so those four will take up the empire, and this is exactly what we saw in Daniel 8 as well. See, behold, Daniel had a dream and he saw these visions, right? And now the angel is explaining him the vision. Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the first and the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, that's Alexander. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So the four kingdoms shall stand up, but not in the king's power, in the first king's power, right? And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. That's Antiochus. But we'll talk about him as we get onto it, okay? But this is exactly mirroring Daniel 8. And then we see it here as well. Oh, sorry, this is a different thing. Okay. So the transition is fairly rapid. It's like Alexander comes and then it's very quickly. He conquers basically the whole world and then he's gone, very young, right? Persia to Greece and then to that fragmentation of the Greek Empire. It all happens fairly rapidly. So the power peaks and then it shatters. It's the same thing that happened with Persia. Same thing happened with Greece, but the Greece will happen even faster. So Daniel's not guessing at this. He's mapping it all out, okay? And with the Persian succession, what you see is Daniel's actually showing us the exact history here, all right? Daniel starts with Persia because that's the world Daniel's living in, right? He doesn't jump straight to Greece. He shows the chain. He says the three kings that's because, you know, and the fourth is far richer. That's Xerxes. He's exactly showing the history exactly as it comes about. This is going to happen in his future. He's predicting this, right? And then after Cyrus, you can line it up like as I was showing you in these things. Cambyses II, and he's like kind of an imposter. And then this guy is an imposter, Pseudosmerites. Okay, he was kind of like he sees the throne, and there was this imposter thing going on. Then Darius the First, and then Xerxes the First is the wealthy one who stirs up Greece. All right, because when Xerxes pushes against Greece, that's what lights the fuse that leads to Greece taking Persia. Their battles and their battles, like the Battle of Marathon and stuff, that's what leads to Greece realizing that they have to take out Persia, and that's what comes to Alexander taking them out. Okay, so that's why that's the first thing Daniel 11 tells us about. God's not guessing; he's telling us exactly how these things are going to happen. Okay, and then now Persia is going to fade away. And then the text kind of speeds up because Greece arrives like a storm. And it's just insane how fast it all happens. So a mighty king shall stand up. The mighty king is Alexander, right? And he shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. He stands up fast and takes over everything. Do according to his will. He doesn't just win one battle. He wins, like he remakes the whole world map. All right? And I'll show you that too. This is Alexander. This is a coin with this thing. This doesn't have some of his coins. They have the horn, like the gold horn, or maybe this is the gold horn too. Some of his coins they have actual gold horns on it. That's why, and Daniel calls them the goats. You know, it's interesting. And this is one of their gods. Can't remember which one. But this is Alexander's empire. So he ruled all here. This is like what the Bible calls Asia Minor, or Cappadocia. You've heard of Cappadocia in 2 Peter, right? Or 1 Peter. And Lydia, you heard of Lydia, Phrygia, Syria, right? And this is Egypt here. And this is where Alexander's from, Macedonia. Okay. He conquered Greece, then he came down here, all through here. This is like Turkey, what we call Turkey today. Armenia. And this is the old Persian Empire that he conquered, right? The Persian Empire was all the way extended to here. But Alexander came down through all here. And this is like all the way out to like India here. The more kind of western part of India, he conquered that as well. The very tip of it before the Himalayas. Okay. So he remade the whole world map. And then at the height of the strength, the kingdom breaks, as it says here. When he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. Okay, because that's what happens. The prophets, these empires, they expand to these incredible heights, and they start to break up and shatter. They suddenly fracture. And so Daniel says it won't go not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. That it doesn't go to his ancestors. Alexander's children never received the throne, right? If he had any children, that's debated as well. But although there's one person that they say it was his kid that they killed, but basically it all went to his generals. Okay. And this is a detail you can't accidentally predict. This is like he knew the details. Daniel knows all these details. So the world's mightiest conqueror, Alexander is still breakable according to God's power, okay? And then after that, the world didn't break into pieces, or the empire broke into pieces. It didn't just return to normal, okay? So you had the four divisions of the empire. So remember, this is Macedonia, this area here. And then you have this part, which is what they call what do they call it? Oh, Thrace, right? So Thrace is like all this part here. Thrace is up here, okay? Can you guys see where my mouse is? Maybe not, eh? Anyway, Thrace is up in the northwest, okay? And then you have what are the other places? Seleucus is from Syria to Babylon. So from around here, this region here, all the way to Babylon was ruled by Seleucus. Okay, so that's the biggest part of the empire here. And then down here in Egypt, this is where they have Ptolemy. Okay, I'll show you that map too. So Lysimachus, he took this part, Thrace. Cassander, he took like Macedonia, where they're from, and that region, the Greece and stuff. And Ptolemy, he took Egypt. And Seleucus took this part here. Seleucus sometimes comes down into here and takes it over. And Antigonus took this part. So this is a way you can understand these kingdoms, the Hellenistic kingdoms that ruled after Alexander broke up, okay? You don't need to memorize all these things today, but the empire fractured into these major regions. And two of them are going to matter most for the rest of the chapter. The Egyptian part and the Seleucid part. From Syria to Persia. These guys are always going to be fighting over this region. This is where Israel is here. Okay, Israel's in this part here. So they're always fighting over this region, and that's why we're going to see that again and again in the chapter, right? That's why the text now goes to this north and south thing. The kings of the north and the kings of the south, okay? So south is Egypt and north is Syria and that region. Israel's like the corridor in between them. So that's why we're going to enter into this stage of the text where it's like this long grind of these empires fighting all the time, okay? So I wonder if I should just read this whole thing. I'll read the whole thing and then we'll go back and go through it in detail, okay? So we're gonna slow it down a bit, but we're gonna do this discipline in a way, right? After Alexander, the empires broke up, and the two major dynasties in this region around Israel are the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and the Seleucid dynasty in Syria, and going east to Persia. Israel is in between them. So let me just read this section. So, and the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And in the end of years, they shall join themselves together. But the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm. But she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estates, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. I shall also carry captives into Egypt their gods with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold. and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and he shall return into his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he had taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up. And he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. But the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish division, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities. And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him, thus shall he do. And shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but he shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. Within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So, what's going on here? Well, basically, there's a struggle between those two kingdoms. The north is Syria to Persia, the Seleucid Empire, and the south is the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. Okay? So this section is long because it's like repetitive warfare. Push, counter push, treaty, betrayal, rearm, invade again. So you're not supposed to come away impressed with the human strategy. You're supposed to see the treadmill of the empire, how it's just the treadmill of betrayal and then fighting and then another army and then another fight. That's just how it goes with these things, you know? Israel is this land bridge between Africa and Asia. So that's why it's always being kind of run through by these mighty empires. The armies keep marching through it. So when the Bible says thy people will be affected by this, it's not theoretical. It's actually what's happening, okay? So you have south, the Ptolemaic Egypt. Here. And north is this empire here. They're gonna rush through here all the time. Lysimachus is in Thrace, that's in the northwest. Seleucus is Syria, Babylon. Israel sits between. So there's 150 years of warfare between verse 5 and verse 20. All right. And then verse 6, you have this marriage alliance, right? The marriage alliance collapses because she was poisoned. And then you have this renewed war between the dynasties. Let me show you that again. So, verse 5, the king of the south shall be strong, one of his princes, he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Remember, south is Ptolemy in Egypt, north is Seleucid, and the east, Syria to Persia. And in the end of the year, they shall join themselves together. But the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. So when they're constantly fighting for control, right? And then you see these specific details that are coming out in the scripture because Daniel's focusing in on the details to show us how God actually can control all these things. This peace deal is a marriage alliance between the daughter of Ptolemy and the daughter of and the son of Seleucus, Nicator. Okay, and Ptolemy the first is Soter, they call him. So the king's daughter of the south, his daughter, Ptolemy's daughter, shall come to the king of the north. All right. And her name was Berenice. And she's the daughter of Ptolemy the second, okay? She's given in marriage to Antiochus II, but it fails because she's murdered, and then the war resumes again. Okay. So they try to solve what verse 6 is basically saying is they're trying to solve the war with a political marriage. All right. And so they thought that, okay, we give this daughter to them, and then that'll seal the bridge between us. But it fails because she gets poisoned. Because the people always have this lust for power, so it doesn't matter what treaty you put up, it doesn't fix the real problem in man's hearts. So she's betrayed and killed, and the war resumes. All right, and the empire just uses these people like little pieces on a chessboard, you know. This poor woman got killed because they build their peace plans on their own ambition, and they don't care about God, right? So they don't keep the covenant. They don't care about those things. So then they end up losing all the things that they strive for. But it's to this time that another power kind of enters the picture, which is Rome. Quietly at first, but decisively. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come up with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. And also shall carry away captives into Egypt with their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into in his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. So all that's kind of the retaliation that went back and forth between the two kingdoms after the woman died. Okay, but this part is about Rome. Okay, but then this part is about Egypt and the kingdom of the north, the Seleucids. They're attacking each other and struggling against each other. 8 and 9. Okay, and then from 10 to 19, this is the kingdom of Antiochus III. But his sons, the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return to his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up, shall assemble a great multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through, and then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. So they're showing the detailed movements of these armies and everything, right? But they're eventually defeated by Rome, the Antiochus III here, which is hinted at in verse 18. After this shall he turn his face into the isles, and shall take many, But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. This is hinting at Rome defeating Antiochus III later in his reign, okay? And then and then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. So this is the fall of Antiochus III. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. This is Seleucid IV, who was shortly after Antiochus IV. There's like a few kings that we're not going to go over in detail because there's too many. But Antiochus III, that's from 10 to 19. He was campaigning in the west, and Rome intervened in verse 18. All right. And then he was humiliated and defeated. That's what we see in verse 19 here. He shall turn his own face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. All right. That's Antiochus III. So I know there's a lot of names and stuff, but what I want you to understand is that Daniel is predicting all these things in detail. In detail. Okay. He knows everything that's going to happen perfectly. All right. So don't worry about all the details, but just realize that Daniel's tracing 150 years of geopolitics here and showing how it all works out in God's plan ahead of time that God knew. Israel remains this corridor through which these armies are constantly marching and fighting. Okay. So the covenant land is under the boots of the Gentiles here. Okay. But now the next section is from 21 to 35. So okay, let me read that. Maybe I won't read the whole thing. Let's go through one by one. So, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. This is Antiochus IV, all right? This is the one who I was telling you, he goes to Jerusalem and sacrifices a pig on the altar, all right? He's the one that's often referred to as the abomination of desolation. But this is not speculative. This is historically very clear that this is referring to him, all right? He seizes power deceitfully. He manipulates alliances. He invades Egypt. And then he turns violently against the people of Israel, the covenant people. Now, I did want to talk to you about this Roman entry to the thing a little bit. So, Rome entered the stage here in 1118 to 19. After this, shall he turn his face into the isles. Isles is like, the Bible uses the word isles to refer to like these far-off lands. And in this case, it's probably talking about Italy and those regions. And shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. This is Antiochus III. He's being defeated by the Romans. So Rome isn't the main character in Daniel 11, but it's casting its shadow already in this section here. Antiochus pushes west here in verse 18. The Isles, okay. And it's like a new kind of power. It's more disciplined, it's expanding, and it's not impressed by the Romans, they're more disciplined, they're expanding in their power as well. They're not impressed with Antiochus, right? So history is kind of changing gears here from the Hellenistic or the Greek power to the Roman power, all right? And the Hellenistic power is being checked by the Greeks here. Because that matters, because the New Testament Rome, when the New Testament opens, Rome is fully dominant over the whole region, right? But at this point, Daniel's just predicting their slow rise and their slowly expanding power, okay? And then right after this, the chapter introduces the ultimate tyrant here. The vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. All right. He's the one who targets the worship of God and takes it over, okay? And we see this later when we see him in 31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall stand to pollute the sanctuary of strength. They shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination of desolate. They shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. The abomination that maketh desolate. This is what Jesus refers to in Matthew 24. I think it's 13. 15. When ye shall therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. See, so it's like, because this is after, what Daniel's talking about is Antiochus, and Jews at the time, they all agreed that that's what Daniel was talking about. But then Jesus comes and says, when you shall see it, the abomination of desolation, which it's like, well, wait, it already happened, Jesus. But then he's talking about how it happens typologically again and again. Okay? And so the same thing that happened with Antiochus here, where he makes the abomination desolate, that's going to happen again later in the future of Israel. And that also connects back to Daniel 8 as well. The temple desecration, which we saw. A king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his hearts. And by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hands. He shall be broken without hand, all right? So all this is something that Daniel's like kind of predicting now. Let me read this section here. So then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes at the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. This is Antiochus between Antiochus III and who is it between them? Right. Antiochus III reigns. Oh, Seleucus IV. So he's not there for very long, right? So you have Ptolemy on the south, Ptolemy the first, Ptolemy the second, Ptolemy the third, Ptolemy the fourth. In the north, that's from Syria to Persia, is Seleucus the first, Antiochus the second, Antiochus the third, Seleucus the fourth. Then there's going to be Antiochus the fourth. That's the one in verse 21. All right. So this one here, this is verse 20. Seleucus the fourth. Okay. There's too many names, I know, but anyway. So this guy, he's just there for a bit. And then in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give honor, the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and honor the kingdom by flatteries, and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Because he won his throne by deception and by treachery, And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yea, also the prince of the covenants. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. Shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the kingdom of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. So he defeats the king of the south, that is Ptolemy IV, I believe. All right. Yea, they the feet of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And both of these kings shall be to do mischief. And they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenants. And he shall do exploits and return to his own lands. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return, and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. They shall take away the daily sacrifice. They shall place the abomination that make it desolate. That's when he slays the swine on the altar. Okay? He shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. The sanctuary is like the temple, and take away the daily sacrifice. That's because he stops them doing their sacrifices. And then place the abomination to make it desolate. That's the swine, slaying the swine on the altar. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do not know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So there are people that do know their God. That's the Maccabees. They're gonna launch a revolution against this guy and defeat him. All right, the people that do know their God. And then, so anyway, let me keep reading here. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by spoil many days. So the Maccabees do defeat him, but they're eventually defeated themselves, okay? Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them understanding shall fall to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So Antiochus represents this escalation of the evil powers, okay? Escalation against God's people. So the empire moved from, first they're having this, trying to expand their territory. Then they began to have hostility against the covenants. And then they became like declaring themselves God and like profaning the temple and stuff, Because in this section from 21 to 35, the stuff about Antiochus is very detailed, okay? The text calls him vile, a vile person, right? It's not because Daniel's being rude, but because this king embodies like corruption and manipulation and blasphemy. He doesn't just fight for land. He assaults the worship in the temple. He shuts down the sacrifice, as I was showing you here. Take away the daily sacrifice. And he desecrates the temple. Okay. And he forces them to become apostates, basically. Such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. That means he's corrupting them to become apostates. Okay. And this is documented outside of the Bible too. Like 1 Maccabees and Josephus talks about it. Okay. So they record that how they desecrated the temple and they persecuted the people of God. All right. It's not a vague prophecy. This has actually happened. Daniel predicted it all perfectly. But the empire collided with the altar, and then it began to crumble. That's when it began to fall apart. Because, well, first it saw that the people were loyal to God over the empire, so that's when it tried to challenge that, right? But some are reduced by flatteries, as it says, right? Some are reduced, they're corrupted, but others know their God. And they are strong and do exploits. That is, exploits meaning they do great things. Okay, that's the Maccabees who defeat Antiochus and actually rededicate the temple. And when they rededicate the temple, that's what we call Hanukkah, or I mean Jews call today Hanukkah, is when the Maccabees took back the temple and they rededicated it. That's why it's the feast of the dedication. You hear that Jesus goes to the feast of dedication. I think it's in John chapter 12. That they have the feast of the dedication, and Jesus goes to it. Hang on, let me just find it. Oh, it's John chapter 10. Sorry. So and it was in Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter. Because it's Hanukkah, right? It's around Christmas time, right? So that's when they have that. Anyway. So now this section, the last section of the chapter is heavily debated, okay? The section from 36 to the end, 45, is heavily debated because some people try to say that it's like the Antichrist. Other people say that it's just continuing to talk about Antiochus. That's what I would say. But it's also I do think it's not just Antiochus. It's representing this kind of typological thing that continues on, because Jesus talks about that as well. And it's going to continue to go on into the future. All right. But what we see here is that this man, the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every God, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Because God is determined that these things should be done. He wants these things to be done. But but Antiochus honors this other God. Let me read this section to you, okay? So from 36, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every God, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his father knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase his glory, and shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter into the glorious lands, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas of in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Amen. So let's go over this a little bit more closely now. This fits Antiochus's trajectory of like this is how he is, right? He acts like he continues to grow in power and exalt himself over God's power, and he does not regard the God of his fathers. But then this is also interesting because the God of his fathers is this Antiochus, So it's like there's something going on here where it's Antiochus, but also other future rulers, and possibly the Antichrist. But it doesn't seem to just leap over thousands of years. It's talking about something here in their time, in Daniel's, the time of Antiochus the fourth. So he becomes this pattern. Antiochus becomes this pattern of rulers who make themselves into God. They deify themselves. And this pattern echoes later in for example, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Which this is Paul talking about a future ruler, okay? Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, by the gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there become a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. This is Antiochus is like a type for this man. This is the Antichrist, right? Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he is God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So you have this, in the same way Antiochus elevated himself to the level of God and as if he was a God among men, so will the Antichrist do the same thing. And between Antiochus and the Antichrist, there's many people that have done the same thing. Even in the time of after Christ, for example, when the Romans were attacking the temple or around that period, there was people who were desecrating the temple in the same way at that time. Okay? So this continues on and on. This pattern continues. But we see that eventually these kings are defeated. These people all come to their end. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Okay, so eventually these people are defeated under God's rule. Okay? But this idea of self-deification, this is something that became very common among the Greeks and among the Romans, where, when the text says that the king magnified himself above every god, people assume that you have to jump to the end of the world, okay? But even in the time of the Greeks, this was a common thing where they would elevate themselves like this, This is Antiochus IV. This is his coin, okay? And so, yeah, in verse 31 that I was showing you, when they stopped the daily sacrifice, they erected an altar to Zeus in the temple, and they persecuted the Jews. Okay. But it says that those who know their God remain strong. That was the Maccabees who came back and defeated Antiochus. Okay. But then you have this idea where he's honoring a god of forces. The king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. He shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined. For that is determined shall be done. So he's honoring these false gods. And but Antiochus, this king that I was showing you, but his name Epiphanes actually means manifesting God, or showing the appearance of God. Okay. So he's branding himself as the appearance of God because he wants people to basically worship him. So the language of Daniel that he raises himself as if he was God is actually seen in the history. Magnify himself above every god. Now, the fact that this typology continues on doesn't mean that we know the future, but we can see that this will continue. This pattern is going to continue. So we can recognize that pattern when we see it. We see it again and again throughout history as well, not just in the Greeks and Romans, but even in modern history. Or you see it with the Holy Roman Empire, and then later with, like, I don't know, Napoleon, or even later than that. Even sometimes the way people today treat Trump or other leaders like that, it's like that same idea of almost raising these people up to be gods, and they almost treat themselves like gods. So it's that self-exaltation where they deify themselves. Okay. Now let's get into the theology of this chapter a little bit. All right. So yeah, so in the Hellenistic times, in the times of the Romans and the Greeks, the ruler worship, or worship of the king, was very common. Okay. And then you have the collapse that came in 1145. He shall come to his end. None shall help him. The arrogant power of these empires, they die alone. Now, with the theology of this chapter, the first thing we can see from this chapter is that God governs history down to the details. Okay, it's not merely meant to impress us with this accuracy of the prediction, though. It's meant to show us that the covenant people must endure. And we can endure by knowing that God is in charge of everything, and we don't have to worry. We can rely on him and just trust in him. And so by seeing that history is all under his hand, we can see that he'll take care of us, That's why it said in verse 2, it said, "Now will I show thee the truth." Okay, it's trying to say that he's not speaking in generalities. He's speaking in the actual truth of history, specifically, right? The kingdoms rise and fall on God's schedule. They fracture on God's schedule. The alliances form and they fail on God's schedule. And the tyrants like Antiochus, they peak and they fall all on God's schedule, okay? So history is not this fog and complex and we can't figure it out. God writes it all out with precision, and we're just watching it unfold, okay? Let me see if I can show you this. Oh, I wanted to show you they have the map of the Oh, I didn't have that map. Oh, I forgot. There was one map I wanted to show you with the corridors. Because the people are kind of the people of God are in this. Well, let me show you here. The people of God are in this corridor here, right? So they're constantly being like in that section from 20 to 35. You see the people are constantly being the section from 5 to 20, I mean. People are constantly being warred over by these empires. The Greeks in Egypt and the Greeks in Seleucid here and the Persian, the Syrian region. They're always fighting over this region here where the people of God are, the Israelites. Okay? And so that's what a lot of this chapter is dominated by, talking about those battles, right? Those fightings. And the covenant land, the promised land, becomes this highway for these armies to go across. And it becomes a bargaining chip in their treaties. And it becomes a battlefield for these rival powers. And it's not random cruelty, it's just that it's a recurring pattern living in this kind of contested world that we live in. Okay? When these empires collide, God's people are often living in the middle of it and getting stuck. But the empires never stop at they start with like trying to get more territory, right? So that's why Alexander conquered that whole region here. They start by trying to get all the territory. Then it goes to like identity of, oh, we're Seleucid, we're Ptolemy, we're Antigones, we're Lysimachus and Cassander, you know? Then it goes to who's got the loyalty of who, and they start to betray each other, and they fight, and they are traitors to each other. Then you have the people. Then you have the people trying to force them to worship the king. This is how the empire kind of ramps up in its pride and its arrogance. This is the pattern that we see. Okay. And that's why Antiochus becomes the chapter's focal point from 21 to the end, because he's the one who's truly entered that phase of trying to make himself God, you know, Antiochus Epiphanes, you know, and he's the one that takes away the daily sacrifice, as we saw here. Because he thinks he's basically God. That's the true nature of these powerful empires when they take power. They become like the beast, and they try to make people worship them, and they try to take away the worship of God, right? Because they can't tolerate a throne above their own, you know. But God always preserves the remnants who knew God, as we saw here. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries. So some of the people of God's people were corrupted by the flatteries of the empire, and they joined them. But the people that do know God, that do know their God, shall be strong and do exploits. And this is just like, this is that remnant, the idea, right? There's always a remnant that God preserves and keeps, right? The ones who stay by him. And then that's actually continued to the persecution. Some of them of understanding shall fail, shall fall, to try them and to purge, to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So some of them that have understanding, the ones that are actually part of God's remnants, they're still gonna fall because God's purging them. Right? But the knowing God here, the ones that know God, are the ones who actually are loyal to him, It's not just, they happen to read their Bible a lot. These people are ones that they'll never worship another God, The ones that are shallow, they're broken, they're corrupted by the flatteries. But the ones that are true servants of God, they'll be strong and do exploits. Okay? But there's a time appointed. Some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge. That is, their God's trying them to purge them, to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. All right. So even the persecution is going to come until the time appointed. Then God will stop the persecution. All these things are on his schedule. All right. So it's never this despair that it will never end. Don't despair, even if you're being tried or persecuted. Don't despair, it will end. But also, don't get paranoid that evil is going to win forever. It will come to an end. God will end it. Okay. So we will be oppressed as Christians and as servants of God, but not forever. Right. And then we talked about how there's this pattern of this self-deifying ruler, right? This is something that we see throughout history. With the Greeks. Remember, this is Epiphanes. He's making himself into a god. Epiphanes means God manifest. And he removed the daily sacrifice. He erected an altar to Zeus, and he persecuted the faithful Jews. But eventually, Antiochus exalts himself above every god. Yeah. What is this thing that? Oh, okay. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. It shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. So his profile becomes this template of self-exaltation, blasphemy, assault on the worship of God, okay? Persecution of the faithful, and the appearance of dominance over everyone. But then there's also this sudden collapse. That's what happens with these people as well. So he's here, he's prospering. So prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. And his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not, he shall he honor with gold and silver. Right? He's honoring these strange gods. But eventually he will come to his end. He shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So there's this sudden collapse that comes on these people eventually, right? That's the pattern. They raise themselves up in pride and they act like they're gods, but then they eventually suddenly are struck down. So again, we don't know the dates of these things or when these things are gonna happen, but this pattern appears again and again. All right. The power of these beast empires They rise. They rise to power. They begin. The emperor begins to deify himself. Then eventually he's suddenly destroyed. Okay. So Antiochus isn't the last emperor, but he's he's one among many, and that's going to continue on. The ruler cult. So this is a big thing in Greece and Rome, where they would make a cult out of the king or the emperor, and he was kind of worshipped. Okay, and then they collapse in 45. We saw. Anyway, I guess I have to talk to you guys about the misreadings, some of the misreadings of this section. Let's go into the Bible here. So many people will try to suggest that this section of Daniel is written after the events of Daniel 6, or like, what I mean is, because it's so accurate, the prophecies, they'll try to claim that this is written after. That's the only way it could have been so accurate. All right. So the chapter tracks the Persian succession, Alexander's rise, Alexander's fall, the division of his empire, the North-South wars, and then Antiochus IV's desecration of the temple. It's all with very careful precision. And so historians, they can't imagine that God could actually predict all these things, right? But it assumes what it's trying to prove. So it's presupposing that the predictive prophecy is impossible, one, and redates the book to protect that assumption, right? Instead of actually looking at the evidence in the book. It's not evidence driven, it's worldview driven. The evidence is that the book was written in the 6th century BC, or 5th century, sorry. But according to these people, they'll say, no, it was written in the 2nd century because that's the only way they could have predicted everything. They didn't predict everything. They wrote it historically as if Daniel had written it in the past, right? But the text itself tells us that it is a prophecy, as we see here in verse 2. Now let us show you the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. They shall stand up yet. It's in the future, right? And the whole theory of it being a late date, or written in the 2nd century, is just because they wanted to deny the prophecy. All right. And another thing people often say about this chapter is that everything written after verse 36 is written in the future, or is, sorry, not written in the future, but is about the future, you know? And so they talk about everything after verse 36. All this stuff here is about the Antichrist. Okay? Because the language of this exaltation, the self-exaltation of the king, it kind of ramps up, right? It becomes more intense. And so, and the blasphemy and the arrogance is unique. It's not something we see very often, right? But there's no signal in the text that there's going to be some kind of time gap of thousands of years. And the narrative seems to just go forward straight from 35 to 36. You know? Some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Now it does seem weird, because This part is about like the Maccabees and their conquest, right? Of over over what's his name? Over Antiochus IV. He is defeated by the Maccabees, these Jewish rebels, right? And they take over. So this part here is about them. So that's why it's reasonable to think that okay, 36 and after, it can't be about Antiochus anymore because it's already done. But it doesn't tell us that it's 2,000 years in the future. So why do people think that? So I think the best way to understand it is that it's both about Antiochus and about these future leaders, and it's a pattern that repeats again and again. We do see these kind of people who desecrate the temple, stop the sacrifice, etc., in 70 AD, around that period. And then later on, you see other types of things like this in history, like as I was saying to you, the Holy Roman Empire, Napoleon, etc. So this type of thing goes on again and again. This pattern of people deifying themselves, these great emperors rising to power, deifying themselves. Okay, so that's why we shouldn't think of it as a 2,000 years thing. It must be in the future. Must be 2,000 years in the future. But we should also not think that it's all about Antiochus or anything like that. It's about kind of both. It's this pattern that continues on throughout history. All right. So we see this thing continue on the typology of it. The typology is like when you have this thing in the Bible that it foreshadows something that's going to continue on again and again. So often people will say that David is a type of Christ, or Joseph is a type of Christ, or Moses. Many people in the Bible, right? They have certain features of Christ, but Christ being the antitype, they're the type. He's the antitype. The antitype is this greater manifestation of all those qualities. So Moses is the great prophet. Christ is the greatest prophet. Daniel is the king, David's the king. Christ is the ultimate Davidic king, and so this model of typology is also seen in these type of prophecies as well, and so that's what we see here at the end. And then another mistake often people will make is they try to turn this Daniel 11 chapter into this thing about modern geopolitics. The kings of the north, they'll say, "Oh, that's Russia," or something like that. Or they'll say, "Oh, it's Iran," or something. And the kings of the south, they'll say, "Oh, that's I don't know, Israel," or whatever. They'll say all these weird like geopolitical things from today and try to bring that in like that. People want Daniel 11 to decode the headlines of today, but Daniel 11 is explicitly describing these Persian kings, the Greek conquests, the Seleucids, the Ptolemaic conflict between those two empires. So it's definitely anchored in history. I do think there's some future elements. I'm not saying none of it is in the future, but it's anchored in history, not in the future. Okay. So there's typology here, but it's not mapping our newspaper headlines for us. And the names don't repeat. So Daniel's giving us a pattern of the way power is, not giving us an actual prophecy about the future for everything we can just figure out for ourselves. And then you have this idea that the prophecy is just history in disguise, where they try to say that it's merely a chronicle about the history, and there's nothing in the future here. Okay, I think that's also a mistaken. idea, right? Because it's talking about thy people, the covenant people, and that's us as well. All right. And you have this desecration of the temple that happens in 70 AD as well. And the endurance of the remnants, that becomes the church. And the purification under persecution, that's also something that happens to the church again and again and again. All right. So this is the theology, this pattern that happens in our Christian history of the remnants, the remnant being protected, the persecution of the remnants and their purification, and all these things continue on and on throughout history. So Daniel's also pointing out that pattern to us, okay? So if you remove that covenant part, you miss the whole chapter. Yeah, you won't understand it. People always obsess over like identifying all these patterns in the chapter, and some of that's interesting, but you want to be careful about that. Yeah. But this is the pattern: conquest, control, desecration, and then self-deification. This is the pattern we see again and again throughout history. And the final ambition of the empire is lordship of itself, to become gods themselves. Yeah. Okay, so Daniel 11 is not really about like oh, by the way, yeah, this idea of the remnant enduring, this is another pattern we see in this book, in this chapter, right? So knowing God stabilizes the faithful, verse 36 to 39. Okay, and then their oppression is timed, it's going to end at a specific time as well. Well, sorry, not verse 36 to 39, verse 32 to 35. People that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. And they shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, it shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge, and to make them whites, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So there's an appointed time when their suffering will end, when the remnant that is being persecuted will reach the end of that period. And this is all by appointment, okay? Let me see if I have a slide for this next part. Oh yeah, so this is what I was just talking about. So it's not written after the fact. It's written before the prophecies, okay? In about the 5th century BC. It's not written later on, after in the 2nd century. That's what many critical scholars will say, but there's no good evidence for it. And then there's no artificial 2,000-year gap between the end of the prophecy and the future Antichrist. So it's better to think of it, in my opinion, as this typology that continues and repeats again and again through history. It's not a modern news decoders to tell you what's going on in modern headlines, okay? Chapter 11 of Daniel is not going to tell you what's happening today in our news. And it's more of a historical fulfillment that happened in that time, in the time of Antiochus IV, but it's also going to typologically happen as a pattern throughout history. So now let's look at this canonical. When I say canonical pattern, what I mean is that we see this thing happening again and again in the Bible, okay? First, you see this remember that this is not like the end of it. Scripture that we're giving us the end is giving us the trajectory of how it's going to continue on. All right. So the Daniel 11 is grounded in history, but it's something that's going to continue on. So Antiochus is the pattern of this self-exalting, self-deifying ruler, as we saw in, for example, verse 36. The king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Okay? And this is the same thing we saw in 2 Thessalonians 2. Who opposes and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he is God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So Paul writes this, 2 Thessalonians 2, long after Antiochus did what he did in the end of in I think 137 BC, okay? But it's the same pattern. So this is 200 years later. Paul's talking about this is going to happen in the future in the end times, right? So that pattern repeats. And then this also, by the way, is seen in Revelation 13. So let me show you that. So the beast rise up. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given him unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and teach in them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. So you see how the same pattern of worshiping, demanding worship, and self-deification, right? The same pattern repeats again and again. So Daniel 11 is giving this historical prototype. Antiochus IV was the prototype for the beast. But that he's not the only one. There's many people in history that follow the same pattern. Right? And then I should show you this thing from so this is the thing that Jesus refers to in Matthew 24. An arm shall stand on his part, and shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and it shall place the abomination that maketh desolate, right? The abomination that maketh desolate. And when you see in Matthew 24:15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Right? So Antiochus fulfilled Daniel historically, but the pattern of profaning the temple and stuff, that continues and recurs, all right? And it expands. So it's not a contradiction, it's this trajectory throughout history, right? Now, the other thing we want to look at is this remnant who knew their God. Sorry. Such as do wickedly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flattery. So some of the people of God were corrupted by the flatteries, But the others, the people that do know their God, shall be strong and do exploits. Those are the Maccabees. Okay, and that's going to continue. There's also going to be a pattern of that. All right, the faithful remnants that when they're under pressure, they are purified by their suffering, and then that's what we see here. They that understand among the people shall instruct many. So the people that understand, the people that are wise, that know God, they instruct many. They shall fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity and by spoil many days. So they're being hunted, they're being taken out, right? But they're still striving for God. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. So people are trying to cleave onto them now, because they're strong. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So we see this in the New Testament where people, for example, in Hebrews 11, where people were being persecuted, but they continue to endure even under the persecution. And Revelation describes saints who overcome through their suffering, right? Let me show you that. And what shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, and of Samson, of Jephthah, of David also, and of Samuel, and of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, brought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fights, turned to fight the armies of the aliens, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance. They might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. God having provided some better thing for us, they without us should not be made perfect. But these are people that endured persecution for the name of God, right? And then Revelation also speaks about people like that, saints who overcame persecution. So Daniel's not merely about predicting tyranny, it's predicting the remnant enduring throughout all of these tyrannical persecutions, okay? The beast's power, it tests our faith, but it doesn't extinguish it. And the other thing we want to look at is this idea of the time yet for a point. It's the time, because it is yet for a time appointed, right? Because that phrase of a time appointed is big in Daniel's theology. The empires rage, the persecution intensifies, but there's always this boundary. At the cross, the political powers, they mock God, they mock Jesus. The religious leadership conspires, and the violence peaks finally in the crucifixion itself, right? Yet, him being delivered by the determinate counsel of foreknowledge of God, that was all in God's timing, right? Oh, sorry. You men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders of sign, which God did by him in the midst of you, as ye yourselves also know. Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken by wicked hands and crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. So you see how God has determined these things by his counsel and his foreknowledge. These sufferings of the people were being persecuted, right? That's all similar to what happens to Christ. It's like all these things are part of something that God has arranged. God has caused history to come to this point, and he's put these people in place there that will kill Jesus. You know, he's put them in that place for his purpose. You know, and it's all. And so sometimes when we suffer, it's also for God's purpose as well, right? It's just that Daniel's showing us that these tyrants and their timing, it's all part of God's plan, right? And the worst injustice in history was Jesus being crucified, and that was all again also part of God's plan. It wasn't chaotic, something that just happened to happen. It was something that happened when exactly when God wanted it to happen. Antiochus had a limit, and Rome had a limit, and every throne has its limit at the end of God's schedule. You know, that's what we see here in 45. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Because when he comes to his end, there's no one there for him, you know? And that's the end of all these self-exalting rulers that try to make themselves into kings of the earth. They don't get any grand redemption. They don't get any permanent dominion. They don't get any lasting godhood. They just get collapse. In the New Testament, the man of sin is destroyed. Remember, the man of sin is revealed, son of perdition, and he imposes himself and exalted himself above God and all that is worshipped, so that he is God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. But he will be wiped out. But the Lord is faithful, who will establish you and keep you from evil. So this is the thing, like, that's why no matter what these things happen in the world, when these kings come up and proclaim themselves to be God and all these things, we just need to put our faith in God, because no matter what, he will keep us and keep us faithful. Because all those who follow that king, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they may be damned who believe not the truth, but have pleasure in unrighteousness. Okay, so don't worry about those people, you know. The man of sin is destroyed, the beast is going to be judged, the Lamb will reign. So Daniel 11 doesn't give us that final victory scene, but it gives the preview of everything. The arrogant power always rises, but it will always fall. It will always come to its end. And when it comes to its end, none shall help him. Okay? All these kings that exalt themselves eventually stand alone and fall alone, and none shall help them. So Daniel 11 is historical, but it shows a pattern, and the pattern points forward. It's not speculation, it's a certainty that this will occur. So, in the end, what we saw is the history is not random, it is measured from Persia to Greece to the divided kingdom of Alexander to Antiochus IV. The sequence unfolds exactly as God predicts. And it's not about showing us the trivia of history that nobody even remembers these people's names anymore, but it's to show us that God is in control of all these kings and all these empires, okay? And the suffering of God's people, we may be suffering as God's people because we're in between these powers as they struggle and strive against each other. All right? And Israel was not always the center of the empire, but it was often the corridor between where these empires were struggling and fighting. So Daniel 11 teaches us that realism, that God's people are not promised to be the rulers of the world or have geopolitical power, but they're promised that the covenant will be preserved. So being caught in the middle sometimes and feeling like you're being struggled under or being trampled on by these great powers, it doesn't mean that God has abandoned you. Okay? It just means that this is part of his plan. And then also we see that eventually these empires often overreach, right? And they go from expanding their territory to trying to manipulate the people, to trying to, desecrate the holy things of God, finally to deifying the emperor or deifying the men in power and making them into gods. Okay, and that's the trajectory of these empires. It's always the same. All right. The final battle is always theological. But knowing God is the anchor under all that pressure, because those that are weak in knowledge of God, they get flattered and then they get seduced. But other people, they get scared and they get silenced. Right? But the people that do know God, know their God, verse 32, shall be strong. And so that knowledge of God, that covenant, will make you strong and give you the power to prevail over these things. So the strength in these crises comes from knowing God, not from controlling outcomes. It's not about knowing your Bible, knowing every word of the Bible or whatever. Knowing the Bible is good, but it's about prayer and obedience and following God's plan, okay? And then also remember that the suffering is always time, that these arrogant powers will collapse eventually. All right? Antiochus came to his limits. There's a time appointed when they will fall. Okay? And Antiochus came to his limit, and other empires will come to their limit as well. The Romans, the Holy Romans, like I was saying, Napoleon and other emperors of the past, they come to their end, okay? So no empire can sustain his blasphemy forever. And no ruler who exalts himself above God will escape the collapse. So Daniel 11 is not a war chronicle, but it's an unveiling of theology and theology through history. That God rules history, God rules these transitions of empires, and he refines his people and protects them. He limits their persecution. He allows the patterns of arrogance of these arrogant rulers to expose themselves. And then he ends every throne that challenges his throne. So the chapter doesn't really end with this victory music, but it ends with the tyrant's collapse. And that silence speaks. The same God who numbered the kings of Persia and Greece has numbered every arrogant throne ever since, and none will outlast his throne. That's what you need to remember, okay? So that is Daniel 11. I hope that helped, guys. Let's see what we got for the comments here. Hey, Noel, what's up, bro? Oh, sorry, Avo, my bad. Not Noel. Hey, what's up, bro? How are you? Raving Evangelist. Hey, what's up, Raving Evangelist? Glory, what's up, man? Savo, what's up? What does it mean called to be saints? I don't believe it's called to be saints. Yeah. But is this it called to be saints in Daniel here? Yeah. Where does it say that, Glory? But yeah, I think all believers are called to be saints, so yeah. Hey, thanks, Frank. God bless, bro. Glad you liked it, man. Yeah, there's a lot to take in. That chapter is very complicated. And I even had a hard time like setting up this teaching, but I hope you guys learned something from that. Hey, thanks, Russ. God bless you too, brother. Lori, send me a DM on Discord if you want to talk about that some more. I don't know what exactly you're saying there, but all right. Let me say a prayer and then we'll wrap it up. Heavenly Father, Almighty God, Father, thank you so much for this Bible study and for this wonderful chance to study your Word. Daniel 11 is a chapter with a lot of information, a lot of prophecies, details that only you could have told Daniel in his time, only you could have predicted, and only you knew the future that it held. And you also have given us a pattern for the future that we'll see as well in these rulers that we've seen through history since Daniel, and we'll see it again in the future as well, and as well finally in the Antichrist. So thanks for giving us that future understanding that we can trust in you no matter what happens, and we know the pattern and we can see it for ourselves now, Father. Thank you. Bless the listeners, Father, and help them to glorify your name and glorify the name of your holy Son, Jesus Christ. On him be glory forever and ever. Amen. All right, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining. And yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. Send me an email or send me a DM or whatever, okay? We'll talk soon. And thanks for watching Toronto Bible Study. Hallelujah.
The Holy Bible, the King James Version. The Book of Psalms, Psalm 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish.